Good evening and welcome to Face for the Newsfirst team. I'm Niresh Aliathambi. With me this evening is Dr. Harinda Vidanage, who is no stranger to this show. He is, of course, the director of the Center for Strategic Assessment at the Kothalavala Defence University. Good evening and welcome to you, Dr. Harinda.
Good evening, Niresh.
Right, Dr. Harinda, it was about 4 months ago that you appeared on this program and we were discussing the Middle East crisis, which had just erupted, and now thankfully things have come back to some semblance of normalcy, we hope. What are your thoughts on how this is going, the whole peace process?
See, the immediate reaction, everybody is relieved that there is a cessation of what we call hostilities, and both the parties, not all the parties, but you see the war started with US and Israel launching strikes against Iran on two major fundamental aspects. One was to deprive Iran of a nuclear capable weapon, and secondly to degrade and destabilize the existing regime to a level that there would be a regime change within Iran. So if you look at it from that objective, the strategic objectives of both the US and Israel has not, that has not taken place.
Hasn't happened.
Actually, inversely, it had created. So it's a very interesting situation. Is the US went to war with Israel. US has gone to peace without Israel. So there is a very interesting dynamic there. There itself may lie the the long-term problematic of this whole calculation or calculus of the peace in that region. But as we all see, there is a cessation of hostilities. So I think most people don't understand it's not a peace deal. It's a deal to stop hostilities up to 60 days, where a certain peace deal, a framework could be worked out. While that is being worked out, there will be both parties had conditions, for example, the Iranians to stop anything, to unblock the Strait of Hormuz, not to develop further their nuclear program. So the Iranians have not agreed to roll back, but not to, and in return, the Americans have withdrawn their blockade. There won't be any attacks, and most of the American assets within the vicinity of closer to Iran will be drawn down. So then that hopefully means there's going to be a certain level of cessation of hostilities, which is a win probably for the world in the short run. But as a strategist, from a strategic analysis perspective, there are clear challenges ahead, where you have an Israel which is very disgruntled and is not happy and it is not a signatory to the MOU. And then the MOU's one of the first conditions is Lebanon. So Lebanon was not an issue at the beginning of the war. So it's a very interesting. So there is an argument that the Iranians, by going to peace, also have strategically managed to create a major rift or a path towards a rift between the Americans and the Israelis, which is from an Iranian side a big strategic win. But in the larger picture, if you look at the way this was received by the Gulf country states, they were all happy this ended. But I would specifically refer you to the Saudi Arabian the proclamation that came out. Saudi Arabia welcomed it, and they kind of said, we are hoping that things will go back to how they were pre 28th of February this year, plus that everybody would make sure regional security would be guaranteed. So if I take you back, so one of the biggest problems why countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE had issues with Iran was that Iran had a significant regional reach through its own mechanisms as well as proxies. So one of the reasons why Israel is saying that we need to continue the attacks on targets in Lebanon is because that they argue that Hezbollah is very present, and Hezbollah by extension is very much supported by the Iranians. And then in the whole region for the Saudis, it's not just the Hezbollah; they are also worried about the Houthis. So in Yemen, so there are significant, long-term strategic and security issues to be dealt with. But the point here is all of that from an angle of a Sri Lankan or analyst, there's not much for us to be happy about, because for a foreseeable future this region will remain in that instability rather than stability because of these dynamics, because yes, the Americans and the Iranians have stopped the war, ended hostilities, and Iran has emerged as an emboldened Iran. The regime more stronger, the IRGC, their key military component, pretty much in command, they suffered significant, losses, right? The Americans had, the war during the war, there were 130,000 targets hit. There were 13,000 targets hit in the first couple of weeks. There was significant degradation of Iranian capabilities. But the fact is that it's more than the material. The motivation and the political will has been strengthened. So in that way, it's no longer a weak Iranian regime, it's somewhat of a strong Iranian regime. So that would irk even the Saudis, even the UAE. They would welcome the peace deal, but I don't think they would be comfortable in having a Iran that would be more stronger than before. So those insecurities and perceptions of security will have somewhat of create an environment of instability, environment of fear. So that is bad for, that is not bad, but that will have effect on logistics, trade, travel, and that sense of insecurity might be a challenge that we have to think in the longer run.
Right. Now, Dr. Harinda, let's talk about what could go wrong. And to me, looking at it, obviously Donald Trump wanted a way out, an exit from the hostilities, because he didn't get what he wanted through hostilities. So he wanted to get out of it. Now he has managed that. So there's no reason to think that Trump and the US would go back to hostilities unless he has a rush of blood to the brain, which he sometimes does. From the Iranian side, one doesn't really expect them to want war again. To a certain extent, if they are provoked, yes. But from the Israeli side, and this is what is so unpredictable, we saw even when the peace deal was, the MOU was close to being signed, they redoubled their attacks on Lebanon. It was almost as if they didn't want a peace deal. They didn't sort of scale back their attacks, saying, okay, there's going to be a deal signed, so we shouldn't mess it up. Instead, they were like a bull in a china shop. And in the end, there were some harsh words between, Trump had to really pull up Netanyahu before it was scaled back. But isn't there this possibility, or even the likelihood, that Israel would mess things up by striking again?
See, as I said earlier, Israel is not part of the deal.
Exactly.
Israel was not consulted to that level, I suppose. Of course, they were told, but I don't think they are their concerns were addressed in this. So that's why I said, the Americans and Israelis went to war, but when they went to peace, it is a different configuration. So that itself is the characteristic of Donald Trump. Where people if I say mildly in diplomatic say, Trump is an unconventional leader. So that itself, there itself lies the problem, the first problem for me to answer that the question as a response to the question you raised. What could go wrong? We don't know. So one of the major challenges people have is Donald Trump. Will he remain consistent? So his consistency has been an issue. The reason he was really pushed.
Consistency is his inconsistency.
Yeah. So there is significant inconsistency within his consistency. So the reason that he was pushed. So he's as people all claim, his style is transactional, the art of the deal, but he's also mainly pushed by forces like the market. Like, for example, in the US, things were going really bad. There was a clear kind of price hikes, energy hikes. So that was a major concern for Trump. And going into the midterms and all, the Trump knew he couldn't sustain this, because I think taking it to that level would have a serious harm on his political career as well as the party. So, but the problem is, as you say, that they came out of this by going to the peace deal. I think it came at a higher cost. The price they are paying is very high, because I think the fact is that to gain those short-term gains is compromising some of the long-term, envisaged strategic objectives of the United States. So it's not just, the compromise is not just a withdrawal or kind of a recession of American power in the region. It is also a recession of American ability to project power and to be seen as a global power. So it's kind of that image of the US as this preponderant, power in the world. That is significantly harmed by this, because it's very clear the Americans were also struggling to maintain, what were they maintaining? They were maintaining a blockade as a counter blockade to a international waterway that was not closed before, and the war emboldened the Iranians to find ways of counterattack. They found the ideal way. They kind of created this blockade of the strait, and in the last few months back, they created an authority for the governance of the strait. So one of the gray areas is that they have said, okay, we will open it now, but they have not promised whether it's going to be a free and open waterway in their MOU. That is a gray area. They have said for this 60 days, we'll let people pass. But the Iranians are strongly arguing that they should have a control of the strait, which is a new thing. And if the Americans fail to gain a total kind of return to the normalcy of pre-20th of February, that will look very bad on US's ability to project power, to be respected as a global agent of change, of governance. So I think
there's a couple of points you made here. One is the freedom to navigate through these waterways. And you get such choke points all around the world. The Strait of Malacca in Southeast Asia. You get the Strait of Gibraltar between Europe and North Africa.
Strait of Taiwan. So these are very critical.
And so on. And between the UK and France, as the English Channel, and so on. And what is guaranteed by international law is that any ship can pass through. But in this case, all of a sudden, this is turning out to be an exception, where Iran is arguing that it has a right to levy fees on ships which go through, which is an absolutely ridiculous state of affairs. And what would such a situation do to the law of the sea?
So that was my point. See, UNCLOS, Iran is not a signatory. US is not a signatory. So there are countries which has not signed. And the other thing is the fact that if the Iranians feel that this is a new way of you can exert pressure and project power in a terrain that they for many years they have militarily adapted, right? So this is what I think most analysts miss this point. I don't know whether during this blockade, few weeks back, the US announced a safe passage. It was called some operation, some safe freedom passage or something, and it announced it globally, saying you can pass. The American Navy will guide you all to freedom. That operation ceased in less than half a day. It didn't even take 24 hours for the Americans saying, okay, operation is finished. Why? Because the Iranians did two things. The ships that kind of sought the shelter or the safety of the American Navy was attacked. And then within the strait, the American destroyers were targeted, right? So that terrain, the US they are still by tonnage the world's largest navy, not by numbers. Numbers now China is the world's, by numbers of surface
number of warships.
Ships. So, but tonnage the US because they have more carriers, right? So but this capability is not adapted to to areas like narrow straits, and that where combat is very difficult, and combat will prove to be quite they will feel the losses. There will be a lot of damage. There will be a lot of casualties. So the Americans may still kind of get over the Iranians, but it will be at a deeper cost. So I think the US is not at a time when they want a major conflict. And actually, in the 80s, the Americans lost to a certain extent. A American frigate was torpedoed by the Iranian midget submarines that created a major diplomatic incident in the 80s. So this during the Iraq-Iran war. So there is that history, and there is that reality of the geography. So
now you spoke about the reality of warfare within the strait.
Yes.
And this is where the US seems to have badly miscalculated. And they seem to have believed in the old style firepower of carrier task force.
Yeah.
Without understanding that in modern warfare, it's evolved. I mean, we saw it evolving in the Ukraine war, where this much smaller nation, Ukraine, has for years now held off this massive. Russia is almost a superpower, isn't it? And it is through new technology. It's not man for man. It's the use of drones and the use of tech, basically.
Yeah. So it's actually from a strategic perspective, it's not just the tech, but how this tech is integrated into strategic planning, and how battle strategies are drawn employing this tech. This is where the Americans had to face problems, because US relied heavily on their traditional, battle-hardened, battle-tested methods, such as they used cruise missiles a lot. So apparently, if you look at the inventory, they have fired more than 1,000 Tomahawk cruise missiles at Iranian targets. If you calculate that 2.5 million per piece, 1,000, that's a lot of money they have wasted.
And the number of casualties on the Iranian side, you would expect it to be in the hundreds of thousands. Instead, it's less than 5,000 people killed officially.
Yeah. So
something around 3,500. So.
Yeah.
the amount of firepower that was unleashed by the Americans, and the cost of, as you said, Tomahawk cruise missile costs so much, and the results are rather meager.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting situation either. So this war was actually a war which a lot of high-end AI was used very effectively. So the Americans successfully targeted. So when you say there are less Iranian casualties, it means Americans have targeted. American targeting has been mostly of Iranian military targets. There were incidents where at the first week they dropped a Tomahawk struck a girls' school, which earlier was a military barrack. So that story is very interesting. It is about how AI was used. So that is how the Americans managed to hit about 1,300 targets in the first few days of and very successfully take out a lot of military capabilities of the Iranians. But the thing is, what Iran, strategy is not about just degrading. Strategy is also evolving. So what Iran looked at. So if you look at this whole war, there was no ground war. There was hardly an air war. There was hardly, if you look at the numbers, they say Americans would have flown with the Israelis to get the 10,000 sorties. But still, from the Iranian side, it was a missile and a drone war. So what they tried to do was, they didn't utilize conventional. They tried to use their missile capabilities, which they had evolved for quite a long time. But when it came to the Strait of Hormuz, they found a space of geostrategic advantage that they could hold and use that space to totally change the outcome of this war. So this is exactly what happened later on towards the war. While earlier, maybe the Iranians were suffering more casualties, their military was being degraded, their ships were sunk globally, they were sunk even near Sri Lankan waters. But the fact is how Iran strategically looked at an option of outsmarting the Americans, and they found that option at the Strait of Hormuz. That is strategic thought and strategic application, and then they had the capability to hold it. Where even with the American military might, they could not operate in that particular space. And to do that, they held the whole merchant navies, vessels hostage. They held the whole world hostage to a certain extent. And that outcome, the American military alone couldn't solve. So they had to go back to finding a political solution, which ended up being this set of negotiations, which ended up Iran actually achieving political objectives they were trying to achieve for the last maybe 30-40 years, like unfreezing their assets.
Dreamt of.
Yeah, because they were cash strapped. Most of their, for example, civilian airlines were falling apart because they couldn't buy. They had sanctions. So actually, this war before that the war was more of an economic war, where all the earlier US administrations maintained trade sanctions on the Iranians. So by converting Hormuz into a superweapon, they have not just kind of achieved short-term objectives of getting the Americans to stop the war. They have actually kind of unraveled the economic kind of pressure the Americans were having for a long time. So this war actually brought them on a bonus of them managing to say, "Hey, take off the sanctions." So it's a very interestingly.
So for the moment, advantage Iran.
Yeah.
But of course, the crisis is not over.
No.
Right. We need to take a short break now. I am in conversation with Dr. Harinda Vidanage. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
මම මෙහෙන් ගියාම
Welcome back to Face to Face. I am with Dr. Harinda Vidanage, and we are discussing the current situation in the Middle East. Now, Dr. Harinda, let's talk about the role played by Pakistan. And it appears that Pakistan has gained a lot out of this in terms of prestige on the world stage. Because prior to this war, Pakistan was a little bit of a basket case. Their economy had crumbled. They were, going to the IMF, and they fought a short war with India, which got nowhere for both those both countries, and they were not being taken very seriously. In fact, they were having border wars with Afghanistan, which no one seemed to care about as well. So they were really not a player on the world stage, or even the regional stage. But all of a sudden, they are the champions of the whole Iran war, this whole Middle East crisis, because they kept on mediating, flying to Tehran, to Washington, flying, their ministers really did put in the miles, and finally they've got this done. In fact, would you say that without the Pakistanis, would this have come to this ceasefire?
Last point, yes, the ceasefire could have happened even with the Gulf states, but I think when it comes to the Pakistan's efforts are commendable, but there are from a I'll break it down from a strategic perspective. So there are certain things that we have to factor in. The most immediate cause probably is because Pakistan and the Saudis had signed last year a defense agreement,
mutual
defense agreement. So in that agreement, I think Pakistan, if there was a significant, kind of the dependence on each other in the times of war.
If either country were attacked,
yes,
the other
yes.
would go to the defense.
In this kind of when the Iranian missiles started falling on Gulf states and Saudi oil and energy targets were being kind of the energy infrastructure were being targeted. The Pakistanis had to even move some military assets to Saudi Arabia, and under that deal, Pakistan is compelled to provide weapons platforms, personnel in defense of Saudi Arabia. So if the war continued, the Pakistani blood and sweat and money would have to be spilled in this. So that is a grave concern. Because that is one aspect. The other aspect is the US-Pakistani relationship, right? Very interestingly, while US had difficult relationships with Gulf countries, with countries in Central Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan has always had a soft spot in the American foreign policy establishment as well as the presidency. So while though we keep on saying it looks like a Trump, J.D. Vance, Asif Munir, that kind of a love affair, no. The Pakistani, even the Biden administration, supported the Pakistanis in many ways. I think even from the Indian strategic community, they started seeing, they were very concerned when the Pakistanis have an aging fleet of fighter aircraft, the F-16s, which were provided in the 80s by the Americans. And for many years, the Americans were declining the upgrades that were necessary, citing various reasons of terrorism and Indian reservations about, there were so many terror groups that the India claimed were operating. So, and of course, Taliban, Afghanistan, all these things. But it was Biden administration which provided for the first time the access to the upgrade and the IMF bailout. So the Americans, so there is within some hawks in the Indian strategic community, they clearly feel, and not just hawks, but some analysts clearly feel, for the US, Pakistan remains an eternal proxy of many sorts, right? And they also feel that in the context of the US-India relationships, and the way it has kind of, there are always ups and downs. And of course, in the surface, the Indian administration would say we have great relationships, we are strategically aligned. But I always remind people, in January 2025, Jay Shankar, the external affairs minister, got the frontline seat during Donald Trump's, inaugural. And three months down, they were slapped a 50% tariff. And now J.D. Vance is saying, the best person in South Asia, the person he likes is Asif Munir. I mean, and to make things a bit more difficult, last week the U.S. administration renamed their major combatant command that looks after this region into Pacific Command from Indo-Pacific Command. In 2018, it was always Pacific Command. In 2018, Donald Trump 1-0 decided to call it Indo-Pacific, and the Indians were very happy because that Indo is there. So it may be symbolic, but this relationship between India and US is something strategically we have to understand and watch. And so some Indian analysts feel that Pakistan is always a proxy to be used as a counterweight to check India. So that is another thing, and the fact that how Americans tolerated, especially Biden administration, tolerated this current administration in Pakistan even to jail Imran Khan, really degrade and his party, and so it's a very interesting dynamic that Pakistan is, the role of Pakistan, and the argument is Pakistan is also a nuclear power. No country is demanding Pakistan to give up nuclear weapons or to, so there is this very interesting Pakistan. So to the credit of Pakistan, they have managed to be in that very difficult perch and managed to still show that they are relevant, not just in the region, not just because they have nukes. Pakistan was always relevant because that was a key corridor for NATO and allies to Afghanistan. So you have to have a Pakistan that was accessible. So Pakistan kind of used that geographic location to their advantage, and always for many decades during the Cold War and even now. And Pakistan now is kind of and Pakistan seems to understand well how to vibe with Trump. Trump likes certain characters, certain personalities. I think the Pakistani field marshal is someone that Trump really vibes with, in a Gen Z way of saying it. So I think there are so many at what we call in international relations studies also we call there's a levels of analysis. So you can analyze Pakistan from all these levels: the personal level, the cultural level, the regional level, the global level. So as you rightly said, Pakistan also understands. The Pakistanis are very smart. The strategic community is very bright. So they also understand this is a great opportunity for them to move into a stage that they never had access, and that is influence. In their strategic calculations, they probably will need it.
Now, one incident that I recall was when there was a clash between India and Pakistan last year, and Donald Trump claimed to have been instrumental in organizing the ceasefire.
He claims that.
He claimed it.
Yeah.
The Indian side downplayed his role to a certain extent, whereas the Pakistanis were all praise for him. That may have sort of made Pakistan, much more favorable in his eyes.
I think it's because Donald Trump is a big transactionalist. Donald Trump always saw it. I mean, they really need India, but I think India was also making large, fast strides in changing. It was becoming the fourth largest economy on the earth, and that I think Trump, being this kind of guy, would have looked at a way of how you also can kind of do a.
Trump doesn't like competition.
Trump doesn't like competition, and India was always, not just even Trump, even before Trump. If you remember Obama's Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Americans were trying to create a large free trade zone, the largest free trade zone in our region. That's why it was called the TPP. Trump vehemently opposed it. But even in that TPP, of course, excluding China, you understand, even the Indians were excluded. India was excluded. And the larger, even now, the current kind of, free trade agreements around RCEP, India is a bit cautious. So it's because from an Indian perspective, that is, India is trying to align with its own national interests. India also has what we call India has tried to maneuver using the term strategic autonomy. So India has always not gone with the American wishes. It had consistently worked, had a good relations with Iran, very good relations with Russia. So I think that also irks the Americans a bit. And Indians have been very straightforward about saying, and India has also had a bit of a running narrative, kind of a counter narrative on how Europeans and Indians kind of, look at this Russia issue. So from a European and American, or what we call a geopolitically Western perspective, India sometimes was a bit of a big irritant because it didn't line up. And India would say, we look at our interests. We are a country of 1.3 billion people. We can't just look at you guys. So this kind of, environment, this is the important thing about this environment, Niresh, is the fact that this is what Sri Lanka has to understand. It is a very different security and strategic environment that is evolving with no real frame, coherent frame. So this applies to, when I say security, it's not just about security from a defensive sense, about economic security, energy security, right, logistical security. So where are we going to plan so how would Sri Lanka look at our energy security in the next 20 years? How are we going to access and source energy resources and maintain consistency? How are we going to kind of look at the demographics of where we are going to get revenues? That was a very simple question, right? Last year, the China alone added 300,000 industrial robots into their workforce, into their factories. It is a very short time. The robotics, we are talking about AI and drones from a militaristic perspective, but we are not talking about the adaptation of that technologies into other fields of work. How long can Sri Lanka depend on our sources of income from the Middle East, which is very much, into manual labor, providing. How are we going to evolve?
So what you're saying is that the world is in a state of flux
Significant
because of technology, AI,
conflict,
robotics, and so on.
So these are all interrelated. We call these. It's not like those days. You can't silo it. They're all interrelated. What this conflict has brought out is that the world is no longer together. Countries have very different objectives. Even countries which align on certain things have very different views about other things. So the India-US relations is a classic example for that, right? And then technologies are upending the way, and AI are upending the way work is done. And then, of course, these conflicts are creating new security challenges where we have to look at how we source because we are a country which relies heavily on imports and also export driven. So how do we look at markets? How do we make sure access like medicine, energy? Otherwise it will create significant political crisis in this country. So this is where we have to, while we are having this conversation on the international security environment, this is where, from a strategic perspective, our national security thinking matters. Because national security thinking is a broad framing of how we safeguard our economic, energy, political security in the long run.
Now, Dr. Harinda, when it comes to all these aspects of national security, energy, health, industry, exports, imports, as well as military security, it's all encompassing, and many countries think of it as such, and their plans are made in such a manner. And in Sri Lanka, we often hear of this concept. It's not really a concept, it's reality.
It's a reality. It's how you frame the reality.
You and your colleagues talking about it, publishing papers about it, but our governments, so over the last 75 years or so, have our governments actually understood these concepts? And is there any branch of government which is sitting down and constantly thinking of this? I mean, we have for energy, for example, we've got the Ministry of Energy. But is that thinking just about bringing in the next few shipments of oil, or does it have a proper long-term plan?
Yeah, I think,
is that plan integrated with the rest of our economy?
Yeah, so that is where we have to have integrated adaptive security thinking. When we use the term security, Sri Lanka is sometimes people are very averse to it, because there is a sense
they think of the armed forces.
They think of uniforms, defense, and all these things. But security is a very broad concept, and most countries have an integrated security approach. And most countries have, even in writing their national security strategies, right? So the reason you have a national security strategy is that you and I, even a high school teacher, can engage with the students on where should our country be, where should our country go, what are its challenges, what is it doing. So it helps that public discourse, as well as a political and economic discourse about how you can debate what is good, what best practices, how and best policies you evolve to address these challenges, as well as look at the opportunities, right? So national security planning involves what we call multi-agency, multi-ministry approach, but it has to be given leadership from the executive, from the very top, the president's office itself. But it's kind of a multi-stakeholder engagement, which if you can create it in there are things like in India, you have the National Security Secretariat, where you bring all these things together. You have a massive, so countries have their different ways of planning. And
but let me point out something here. In my long experience as a journalist, whenever we have these multi-ministerial, multi-departmental committees that are appointed, they don't work very well. And one of the key reasons is that you have people appointed who have other full-time jobs. So you would appoint people from the private sector saying, oh, this is the chairman of this group and he has a lot of knowledge about that particular industry or whatever. And true, he or she has a lot of knowledge, but he or she can spare perhaps 2 hours of the week for this. So that doesn't really work. It's just one meeting. And the same goes for public servants. The secretaries of various ministries are appointed, and they have their full-time jobs. So this is something additional. Then you have somebody from the Aegis department who is put there, somebody else from the foreign ministry. It's sort of an additional thing.
So
don't we need a permanent
you need
structure?
You need a permanent structure that can be
this.
from a National Security Secretariat, that could be through the Office of National Security Advisor if we create one.
Which is what the US has.
The way of sourcing.
Other countries have this.
Other countries have this. They source these things. As you said, these people don't have much time, but you get the input from them, and then that's it. You then work out the planning. There, for example, the US created what they call the Office of Net Assessment. For many years. I mean, it was the Office of Net Assessment which did all the assessment. Even for now, while the US Department of Commerce is very powerful.
Absolutely.
It looks after, even today I saw they have told Anthropic, the AI company, not to particularly sell a certain code of a certain product they have just released, because that can have a national security impact and a global security impact because of the capability and so I think that kind of, it starts not just with the institution, with the vision, with the thinking, right? We really have to have that thinking to establish a institution, and this institution, I think Sri Lanka's major, everybody says no, governments change, things change. So my argument is that it happens because we haven't created the fundamental layer infrastructure, structures, institutions, right? When I say that is why the if you have a national security strategy or basic fundamentals of what makes a national security strategy and an institution that looks after, governments may change, but the fundamental pillars, the institutions will remain. You can even change people, you can appoint your political, whoever, but they have to still work for a certain set of objectives that is nationally aligned and that everybody agrees. How you and I do it may differ, but the objectives are there. Today, the problem is we come to the table, say this is empty. So we don't know what the framing is. So that is why national security strategies has to be created a certain framework. As you said, a certain set of institutions have to be created. Those institutions should wither and not be. It should be resistant to political cycles. These are institutions that should be established.
And we have seen how our national security has failed time and again, because of the lack of such institutions or the lack of leadership. For example, one could say that the economic meltdown, the bankruptcy that the government went through 5 years ago, was due to the central bank not doing its job, was due to the Ministry of Finance not doing their job, and not understanding the concept of national security when it comes to that kind of economics.
So I want to add a last point here. Another problem is that, political leaders come with a certain view. This is what went wrong in this country, right? So there was corruption. Then there was overspending on a military, or there was, there was no real environment to stimulate investment, FDIs. But this is a view, right? So we really need institutions that could do actual assessments and tell you, this is the amount we spend.
The reality.
Not
a hunch, not what the minister's brother-in-law told him.
Yeah, so what happens is, that is why one of the biggest drawbacks we have is, even leaders with the best of intentions, we may see, we may be proven wrong based on some of our assumptions, right? That is why you need institutions. That is why people say we are democratic elected, we are well intended. No, you still need the institution. There's a very interesting phrase in Madison. Madison was one of the founding fathers of the US Constitution. There's a Madison Papers on. There is this collection where the Americans immediately created the separation of powers, right, to make the independence of the institution.
TV1, TV for life. Newsfirst, live at 50.
If why you need such separation, he writes very beautifully, very elegantly. If angels were governing angels, no problem. If angels were governing humans, no problem. If humans are governing humans, humans are always fallible. That is our nature. The only way to get over it is strong institutions. Institutions are also people, but we have to follow a certain set of rules, codes that the institution works, and the institution's rules and codes are not politically jaded or colored. So that is why, for example, if you are the leader, I am the leader, I come to this country, these are our national security priorities. These are the pillars of national security. How you and I address it can differ. But then it gives us a strength of ability to work on things, frame things, have a debate, frame policies. Every country's policies change over time, but the fundamentals don't change. They may change occasionally.
The interest of one's own country.
So that national interests, national requirements, development goals, those remain constant. So I think this is the argument we should push forward. And the important thing, we are living in that country, is especially these fundamentals, if they are not there, can be created by governments which have significant mandates. If you have a significant mandate and you don't do that, that's a bit of a shame.
And on that note, I'm afraid we are out of time. My thanks to Dr. Harinda Vidanage, Director of the Center for Strategic Assessment at the KDU, the Kotalavala Defence University. And thank you very much to you at home for watching. Don't go away because our next program is coming right up. Have a great evening.